Yeah, I'm ready now, Anu. Ready now. Working.
It's working.
Yeah.
Could we all settle down? We're about to start. Please, can we all sit down? Okay, we're about to start. Welcome, everybody, to this very important event that's been organized around a career at the UN. As you know, the UN is one of the most important agencies around development issues in the world today, and particularly in these times, which are very challenging, as we all know. So we have for you a really distinguished panel of both people who have worked for long careers in the UN and also more recent alumni who joined the UN, who will offer their different perspectives. And it's my pleasure to introduce all of them. So let me start with Nicholas Rosellini, who has recently retired from the UN as a resident coordinator in the PRC. He previously served as UNDP Deputy Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific and as UN Resident Coordinator in Bhutan. Before that, he worked in various capacities in UNDP, including the Bureau of Management in New York, Vietnam, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and Ghana. And today he's come to us from London. Thank you for traveling this far, and has found where IDS sits. So finally, hopefully, this is on his mental map where IDS is. Thank you. We also have with us Michael Askwith, who's much more local, traveled only 10 miles to come here. He began his time at the UN serving as a volunteer junior professional officer. After completing his postgraduate degree, he was UN resident coordinator in both Brazzaville and Equatorial Guinea, and later at the UNDP headquarters. After serving in countless other posts, he moved into a consultancy role with the UN, working with over 40 missions in 30 countries between 2000 and 2017. He's also very helpfully created some guides for careers at the UN, and he'll be talking about them along with the relevant QR codes that give you some more insights. We also have with us Veronica Corbellini, who's a social science and gender-focused researcher from Italy. In 2022, she was here, not very long ago, as a master's student and graduated with a degree in gender development from IDS. She recently completed a 6-month assignment in Barbados at the UN Women Multi-Country Office of the Caribbean, working in disaster risk resilience, climate change, and humanitarian action. And I'm sure she'll give you some recent insights into how to apply to get into the UN and what it's like working there currently. We also are delighted to have Priya Pajel, who is online. Hello, Priya. Yeah, there she is. She also graduated quite recently from IDS in 2021 with a master's degree in food systems and international development. She currently works as an agroforestry specialist at FAO's regional office for Asia Pacific in Bangkok. Before moving to Thailand in September 2024, she was based at FAO's headquarters in Rome, where she supported the forestry division's global agroforestry work. So welcome, Priya. Thank you for joining us online. The way this is going to work is that we're going to have our own very student, John Ba, who's going to moderate a set of questions and ask the panelists to respond. And then we'll have some Q&A from the audience as well, because I'm sure you have lots of questions about how it's to work at the UN and how to actually get into the UN. Okay, over to you, Janba.
Okay, thank you very much, Anu, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm really thrilled about this evening. Well, to begin our conference, we will hear Nicholas, who's going to tell us some brief overview about the structure of the UN, and then we're going to pass to the questions. Nicholas?
Yes, thank you. Is the sound level okay for the? Yeah.
Can I have the mic back for a minute? Sorry, I was told, I totally forgot. I was told to inform everybody about the fire exits, those most important things. So in case the fire alarm goes off, because there's lots of you and we don't want a sort of confusion, there's one fire exit there that will lead to outside this building down a set of steps. And there's also a fire exit that you go down to the front of the building near the reception, and outside on the lawn is the convening area. So just to bear that in mind. Sorry.
Okay, I'll get started. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting Baufunks to this career talk. Baufunks stands for the British Association of Former United Nations Civil Servants. It's, in other words, it's an association of retired United Nations staff from various agencies who have some sort of links with the UK. It has about 700-800 members and is a social association as well as looking after the interests of the members. It runs a couple of programs that are of interest. Firstly, the reason we're here today, which is the Career Paths program, where members of Baufunks go and talk to university groups, usually either UN associations, UN societies, or the careers department. And we share our experiences and give you the opportunity to hear a little bit about life in the United Nations. We also have the Career Records program, where we encourage retired UN staff to contribute their documents and memoirs. And we have a partnership with the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where they're archived. And these are available to researchers who are interested, not just in the official documentation, but also in the kind of social history of the United Nations and how and why staff in the United Nations acted or performed their duties. Okay.
Thank you very much.
The next slide, please. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this, but just to reiterate, the main functions of the United Nations are the political role in peace building, development, humanitarian, and human rights. So if you are interested in a career in the United Nations, people do move between these different streams, but it's important probably at the outset to focus on one or the other. And there are many different agencies working under each of these pillars of the United Nations. I think whichever part you're interested in, it is looking at the UN Charter and fulfilling the aspirations of the people of the world. And I think working in the United Nations is about translating the ideals of the United Nations into reality, into action. Next. I think you'll be hearing from me about the complexity of the United Nations. And this is just a snapshot of some of the emblems of the various UN agencies, funds, and programs, which are very many. Next, please. This is the official organization chart of the United Nations. And even if you spend a whole career in it, you'll probably only work in a tiny fraction of all of that. The United Nations has 30 different departments under the Secretary General. And that covers everything from peacekeeping to political affairs to drug control to humanitarian coordination. Those 30 departments report to the Secretary General. He appoints their leaders and they follow common recruitment procedures. But in addition to that, there are another 37 more or less independent agencies, funds, and programs which form part of the United Nations system. And each of those 37 entities have their own governance, their own governing board, their own recruitment procedures, and their own fundraising requirements. Next, please. Another way to look at the United Nations, if you're interested to join, is to see where the money is. In total terms, the trend has been upwards in the last decade or so. And in 2023, there was about 67 billion US dollars in revenue. And that represents a 40% increase over the decade, over 10 years. However, this money is highly skewed to certain activities and highly skewed to certain agencies. So for example, out of that 67 billion, 50 billion is earmarked contributions. That's the red line. And the peacekeeping operations account for another large portion of that. And that's the assessed contributions, which is the blue line, the longest blue line. So actually, when you look at all these different UN agencies, the amount of unearmarked money available is very, very limited and spread around many agencies. So most funds for agencies ends up with humanitarian agencies or with peacekeeping, with agencies such as the World Food Programme and UNICEF and UNHCR, and with the DPKO for the peacekeeping operations. The amount of fungible money, let's say, is very limited indeed. Next, please. The UN system workforce is about 125,000. That is people on long-term contracts, let's say stable career paths. But in addition to that, there's probably at least another 100 or 150,000 on short-term contracts. And that's how most people get into the United Nations nowadays, with more limited, shorter contracts, which do not have job security and may finish after a couple of years. In addition, the peacekeeping forces is probably another 80 to 100,000 people at any one time. Next. Looking at personnel by organization, it's also skewed again, I suppose, logically towards the agencies with the most financial resources. So a lot of it is going to the what they call the operational agencies that deal with activities at the country level, and in those cases, mostly on crisis and humanitarian work. The United Nations has a big chunk, but that's 30 different departments, and a lot of that is the civilian part of the peacekeeping. Next, please. Yeah, the challenges and opportunities. If you are looking at joining the United Nations nowadays, I mean, these are some of the things that are on the horizon, and the kind of issues that you will have to be tackling. The UN in global governance is under a lot of question. It has not been reformed in a major way since it was set up after World War II, at least on the political side. And on the development side, it hasn't been reformed in a big way since the 1970s. And I think people within the United Nations, as well as people outside, observers of the United Nations, feel very strongly that there needs to be very in-depth reform. And perhaps if you join the United Nations at this point in time, you will actually see that. It didn't happen in my time, but I hope you may be more fortunate. And part of that is the issue of cohesive leadership, not just within the United Nations, but from the member states that provide the oversight and direction to the United Nations. There's what the Secretary General, the current Secretary General, has called dysfunctional Security Council, and a lot of issues arise from that. But of course, there are many opportunities. The United Nations is in a unique position. All countries are member states of the United Nations. So it has a lot of legal and moral authority in terms of looking at the world issues. And it often does set the agenda, even if it's in a quiet way. I mean, the agenda on climate change, the agenda on leaving no one behind, and the sustainable development goals. It brings together the member states of the United Nations and reaches consensus on the way forward. So you'll be working for a very influential organization or components of that organization. And reform is happening, but that reform is probably not fast enough to satisfy the critics. So I hope that gives an overview in terms of how complex and diverse the setup of the United Nations is, but at the same time, we are all unified by a set of common beliefs and the expectation that we all perform with high standards of integrity and impartiality and independence, whichever part of the United Nations you serve in. And I think we all believe, as Kofi Annan said, that we all belong to one human race. Next. Okay, I think this will be probably distributed later, but these are some of the websites where you can find information and job opportunities at the entry level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. That was very illustrating. Before we pass to the questions, I would like you to know that Michael very kindly had printed some QR codes that you can see all over the room and in the website that will lead you to all the informations to applying to the different internships and volunteers of the United Nations. So I really encourage you all to take a look to that after the conference. Well, so we're going to start with some triggering questions. Victoria is going to help us to keep on time, so I appreciate if you keep an eye on her. I would like to start with Priya, that is connected from Bangkok, and then Michael, asking you, what are the pros and cons of working for the UN? Priya?
Can you see me?
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me. I wish I could be there in person back at IDS, but as was mentioned, I'm very far away. I was actually expecting to answer a question more about my personal journey to the UN. So maybe I'll start with that, and then I can touch on the pros and cons to give some background. But I should start by saying that I'm speaking in my personal capacity today. So I joined the UN right at the start of my career as an intern while I was still writing my thesis for IDS, actually. So I got an internship at the headquarters of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, which is one of the specialized agencies that Nicholas just mentioned. And I ended up merging my master's thesis topic with the work I was doing as an intern. So it was still COVID time. So it was a remote internship. I was still writing my thesis in Brighton, but as soon as I was done, I moved to Rome. Even though my remote contract didn't give me access to the office, I still tried to connect with my team in person as much as I could, sometimes meeting in coffee shops across the road from headquarters. So at the end of my internship, I was offered a consultancy. As Nicholas said, consultancies and short/medium-term contracts are often the entry point for young people nowadays. And I've been working at FAO ever since, so I could be considered one of those more continuous consultants that work on a core area of work of the quote-unquote regular program. So now I was 3 years at headquarters, and I just recently moved to our regional office in Bangkok for the Asia Pacific region, because as a young professional, it's especially important to get out there, get out of headquarters, get more project and field experience. And as is often the case, I mean, for me, it's been really a mix of luck, the right timing, a supportive team, and persistence that has allowed me to get through all of those different steps. Getting picked from the pool of interns, that's, you know, huge, to getting my first consultancy, then getting on FAO's long-term roster of consultants, and finally moving to the regional office. So, I mean, if I may give a piece of advice, really the master's degree and thesis writing do offer a good opportunity to somewhat specialize, which is something that you can sell when you're applying and interviewing for jobs at a UN agency in a related field. So as Nicholas said, I mean, it helps to have, even though it's early and it's hard to know, it helps to have your sights set on the technical area you would want to work in. I mean, I started out quite broad. I was interested in sustainable food systems. That's why I did the food and development MA. And then I got quite specific. I now work in agroforestry. I got to that stage actually through the thesis. It was kind of a stepwise process. But if you can start to set your sight, if you know that you want to work at the UN after the master's degree, an internship is really the best way to start. And if you already know which agency you want to work at, for me, I knew I wanted to work at FAO. So I mean, I targeted the Food and Agriculture Organization because I wanted to work in that area. I think it's a good opportunity to try to start. I know it's stressful writing the thesis and there's so many potential topics that you could write on, but it is a good way to start getting that entry point to your first job. In terms of pros and cons, like Nicholas mentioned, I mean, I think now the UN is a really changing space. I think we are going to see change in the way the organizations are run. And as a young professional, I mean, we are many, and it is competitive even within the organization. So you're often not sure actually if you're going to get the next contract. And like I said, it really depends on a series of factors, some of which are in your control, some of which are not. So this is something you need to accept, but there are really, once you find a good team or a good pocket of work that you align with, most of the time, I mean, they will be supportive of you and will, I mean, treat you as a human that needs career development and will look out for you. And I think one of the biggest pros of working for the UN, and this is something I actually just mentioned to my colleague today, beyond all of the kind of more obvious ones, that you get to work on something that's really fulfilling and gives you, especially if it's something you're passionate about, you feel like you're spending your 40 hours a week on something really interesting and meaningful. But something that I've really noticed, especially recently, working at the UN and FAO, I mean, we might not have the most money in the world, like was said, and we maybe are working at a different pace than a private consulting firm. But when you reach out to a collaborator or a partner organization or a research institute or even an expert in the field, you will get an answer, and you will likely get a positive desire to collaborate, because I mean, a lot of the UN agencies, especially the specialized ones, I mean, we're the experts in the field for food and agriculture, statistics, forest cover data, all of these things. I mean, we're bringing out the global stats on that. So when you reach out to someone external, a lot of the time it ends up being really fruitful. And I mean, before working for the UN, before my master's, I worked at a smaller consultancy firm. And I mean, it could be frustrating when that would happen, that you wanted to reach out, you had a question about a project and you wouldn't be able to get that information or the people that actually had the expertise. So, I mean, I'll stop there. I don't want to run over my time, but that's a little bit of a picture of how I got to my relatively still early stage in the career. But I have to say, I mean, in these 4 years at FAO, I've learned a lot. I mean, it's a huge organization. It feels sometimes like our different divisions are different worlds, and you have fisheries, you have forestry, you have obviously plant production and protection. So you can even find all of that expertise in-house.
Good. Thank you, Priya. I'll try and follow on. But I'm very attentive to the fact that Victoria is looking at me and she's going to wave her finger if I overstep the mark. Anyway, we've been asked to give pros and cons and I've written them out, and this will be included in our report. So if you go to sleep now, you can read it later. But basically, I have 8 or 9 pros and about 8 or 9 cons. So I'll go through them very quickly. You can write them down or you can forget them, but you can read them later. But basically, the first pro is being a member of an international civil service. I was brought up in Kenya. I feel more a foreigner, even in this country, than a Brit. So I'm not totally at ease being a Brit, even having this horrible blue passport. So I was always proud to be part of an international organization, a civil service, trying to, as Nicholas said, trying to implement national and international policies set by somebody else. But that was our job. We were there to make things happen. Second pro, our job was actually to seek to uphold and implement internationally agreed norms and principles, both through UN instruments and agencies. These norms and principles are the fundamental basis for the UN, and they were established because individual countries rather made a mess of the world, especially in World War I and World War II. Unfortunately, some of these norms and principles have been messed up most recently through the whole Ukraine situation and the Middle East, of course. There are lots of them. The UN is there to try and implement norms and principles against, in many cases, individual governments, and we can see that very much in the Middle East at the moment. A third pro, I've always enjoyed working in an international environment with many nationalities and cultures. And this is both professionally as well as socially. I've always been more interested in lots of different countries, nationalities, races, and I think this is very rich. And it's definitely a pro. A fourth pro, there are opportunities to see the world and to serve in headquarters and in country duty stations. I had 3 headquarters assignments and I had 6 country ones in Africa, in the Caribbean, in the Middle East. And these were all extremely enriching. And it's always a pleasure and an honor to be able to travel around and enjoy work as well as seeing the world. A fifth one, in terms of work, Nicholas will identify with this. We have responsibilities at all levels on the work side for designing, managing, coordinating, monitoring aid strategies as a whole. I was with UNDP, which covered all sectors. And at the level of a program officer or an assistant resident representative or as a deputy or as a res rep and a resident coordinator, our job was basically to make sure an aid project stroke program stroke package responded to the needs of the country where we were working, also complying with international norms and all the rest. And it was fascinating professionally to be part of designing, working, coordinating these sort of things, not just within UNDP, but with all agencies, especially when one's responsible for UN in a country as resident coordinator. The sixth pro, on the family side, there's an opportunity to expose one's family to international life and living. Otherwise, often we'd be living in our own country, but there's an opportunity to work and share with a family in other countries. Another pro is an opportunity to learn and use languages. For us Brits, we're not very good at other languages, and that's less and less the case. We're not learning languages because we're rather idle. Other countries are forced to learn other languages. I was fortunate because I had French, and I've spent 15 years in French-speaking countries and 5 or 6 years also in Spanish-speaking countries, so I was rather spoiled. But it was an opportunity and it's an honor. And on the financial side, the UN, I would like to say, pays well, obviously not as much as the big corporations, but we're not there for that. But we have never been disappointed, and I think this is a pro. On the cons, there are potential disruptions of reassignments when you go from one country to another. And this is often felt more by the spouse and the family, but these are practical issues when one starts with a glossy view of, I'm going to join the UN. After 30, 40 years, when you've traveled about quite a bit, there's quite a lot of stress and families have to go through a lot. In that respect, sometimes a con, there are limited opportunities for spouse employment, even though the UN has tried to encourage that. Spouses often, it's more difficult and they have to be more self-sufficient. And the spouses these days are both male and female, of course, and partners. These are practical issues which one needs to think about before one really embarks on a career, or even when one's in the career, one has to be ready to be flexible. A third con, there's potential job insecurity. The whole contractual system has changed a lot. In the old days, one started with a short fixed-term contract for a year or two, and then one could get permanent contracts. Permanent contracts are almost out of the window, and they're quite difficult to get. And even though Nicholas said there are 100,000 people with longer-term contracts, this may be the case, but it's quite difficult to get them these days. So one has to be ready for potential job insecurity. A fourth con, because of the overall financial situation, even though the figures sound quite a bit, especially on the humanitarian, the peacekeeping, on the development side, and within the UN agencies, they're always pushed for money, and donors are not giving as much money as we would like, and there always are restrictions. And so that can affect the scope for the UN agencies to do what they can do. Fifth one, sometimes there are lack of job opportunities because of financial constraints within the agencies. A sixth con is that inevitably there's massive competition for each post, and often there are specific criteria regarding gender or not country of origin or region, all sorts of things. But there is competition, and you of course know it. I was talking about IDS and the challenges of getting jobs. Everybody wants a job, but there is competition, and you know it better than I do. And lastly, like it or not, there's quite a lot of politicization in decision-making, in recruitment and various other areas, and these can be a con. On the whole, I haven't really felt it, but I think it's there. Anyway, those are my numbers. They're written up a bit more, and Victoria did wag her finger. I apologize. Anyway, over to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I really enjoyed the last pros, because it's true that incomes are important, but I think that one joins the UN because you want to make a change in the world, and that's very encouraging. Well, after these next questions, we're going to take some questions from my mates, the audience. So those who are online can start leaving your questions in the chat, and we will take them later. Well, I would like to ask Veronica and Nicolas about your beginnings in the United Nations. Like, how was it? Where did you start it, and at what stage of your career did you did that happen?
So thank you. Thank you so much. So I come from a really different background, because I studied as I was a psychologist back in Italy, and I work in the health sector. So I was working in the hospitals with was working in neuropsychiatry and in gynecology, oncology. So I was coming from a really different background, but that's where I started to learn more about sexual reproductive health, and then to the vulnerable population. And that brought me to international development, which led me here to do my master's degree in gender and development. So at first, I was not that much knowledgeable of really what was the overall situation of international development institution and everything. So the master's was a learning process to actually understand what are the different institutions and how the system is structured. And since I started my master, the United Nations agency that caught my attention the most was the UN Women. So that's why I was looking for that once I graduated. And I actually started applying process throughout my writing of the dissertation. And as Priya was saying, I also used my dissertation as a way to then actually understand what I wanted to learn afterwards. So for me specifically, I did menstrual health discourse within the humanitarian protracted crisis, which landed after, in one side, developing my own association with a group of women in Italy, where we do menstrual health education, but on the other side, looking for the aspect of gender in humanitarian action. So actually, the process started in July before graduating, where I sent over my application. I was actually reviewing my application, what I was writing on it. And then the process was actually a little bit long because it's not, it happens sometimes that it's a little bit shorter. So it will happen that you can get an assignment like immediately after a few months, but specifically for my case, I applied in July. I got the interview in November, and then I got the assignment in May. So I waited a little bit long in this case. And then I actually moved to Barbados in September of last year. So it really depends, because it could be much quicker, but it always depends on the office. And I feel like I was really lucky on being able to not go on a headquarter, but go in a smaller office, because Barbados has, UN Women Barbados is looking at 22 countries and 22 islands. So they're all the Caribbean islands. So it was a big office, but also small in the terms of, we were in Barbados, there is the UN building, which keeps together at different agencies. So we were, for example, on the second floor, but there was FAO, WFP, UNICEF, UNDP, UN OCHA, and that helped on working all together. And most often we will actually do meetings all together and asking other agencies to come together and have discussions. And one of the things that I think I also gave it as an advice, but when throughout the interviewing process, but even after, when I had my first meeting with my supervisor, I was really upfront on what I liked, what I was passionate about, and what I wanted to work also. So for example, I mentioned my passion for menstrual health and sexual reproductive health. And that actually opened up possibilities and opportunities throughout the internship in collaboration with other organizations. So for example, there was happening a meeting with a UNICEF staff, and they were working on menstrual health in schools assessment. And my supervisor said, well, she has the knowledge. She knows exactly the topic. And that was really well received, because they really appreciated the fact that you were able to give input on what you actually liked and wanted. And it's also easier way to even work at the end. And it was, in being a small office, I actually came across with different figures, because we were 5 interns. There was a JPO and some consultants, and then the most permanent staff. So you can actually, we were actually able to see some of the things that even you were saying in terms of like the contracts, the benefits, the instability. We spent a lot of time even discussing the topics of being reassigning and going to different places. What does it mean in terms of relationships and even stability and a personal journey? Because I did the internship at 30 years old, and I had a lot of questions on being like, I'm 30, and what it would imply on the long term in my career, doing a specific kind of work and having the stability or instability of doing a job in the UN. And it's not answers that have a straight answer. It's still a lot of to be answered, but my point of doing an experience at the UN after my master was coming from the need of also seeing things from a different perspective. Having worked in public health in hospitals, I knew how that worked. And then having my association being a little NGO, I know what does imply working on specifically in Milan on a specific topic and working with different institutions. But I wanted to look at from a higher, a different perspective on a more operational point of view. And the experience in the UN definitely helped. And seeing in terms of like how the UN works on the ground with our CSOs and with other institutions, but also across the UN agencies help to give a little bit better perspective of the overall, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think like Mike and many others who work in the United Nations, I had a international background. And when I completed my studies, I studied economics. And when I completed my master's, I was looking for a job or a role which would have an international dimension. I felt that was an important aspect of any job I took on. And I also wanted to work with an organization which had a strong value base. And perhaps gave me the opportunity to contribute even in a very small way to social progress. That's about as far as I knew what I wanted to do. It was very vague. And I wasn't quite sure how to take that forward, that ambition forward, but I found out about the Junior Professional Officer Program, the JPO program, which is sponsored by a number of governments. I think nowadays about 24 governments sponsor, and that gives you a 2-year fixed term contract and allows you to sample in a sense for 2 years how the United Nations works, and it gives you a line job. It's not an internship, it's a full job in a UN agency. And I was sent to Ghana, and I found the work extremely interesting. I was recruited as an economist, but I think ended up doing more development management and project management, which I enjoyed. Ghana had been through a very tough time economically at that point. And we were very engaged in seeing how to revive public services and introduce public sector reform. And I found that extremely interesting because there's no conditionality. I saw some of our sister organizations and the kind of conditions they were putting on the loans that they were giving out. But with the United Nations, the work is a partnership with the local government and the local people. And it's a matter of negotiation to come to a consensus on the way forward without any conditionality. And I thought that was very important in terms of sustainable development. So at the end of the 2 years, I decided to apply and I passed the tests or the interviews and exams. And I ended up staying with the United Nations for about 34 years. First, mostly with the United Nations Development Program, but as a resident coordinator, also with the United Nations Secretariat and with the Secretary General. And I found each assignment was like a new assignment. One faced a new set of challenges, a new set of development issues to cope with, a new set of political parameters to live within, and so on. So the work never got stale. I also like the way you can zoom in and zoom out in the United Nations. Zoom out in the sense that the United Nations, as I said before, we're looking at global agendas on development, on the environment, on human rights. And you can work on those at the headquarters level or the regional level, or even at the national level. But you can also zoom in and see very local development and work with local communities in terms of seeing how they can develop their own community. So you have those opportunities to work at the micro and the macro level, which I found fascinating. So in that time, I was able to work in New York, in Bangkok at the regional level, covering the Asia Pacific, so a lot of travel, and in about 8 countries, I think. So all in all, it was something that I found fulfilling the whole time. It had its ups and downs, but I always found it something I didn't regret doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both of you. It was really interesting when you said that knowing yourself is important, knowing what do we want, what do we like, and what do we want to do. I think that is a very good advice, not only for applying for the UN, but for every project of this level. So we will begin with some questions from the online mates, and then we will have some questions here in person. It's going to be 2 questions. So to split them or to answer.
Okay, this is from Patricia. Do you think that applying with a PhD is a pro or a con? Since perhaps the UN or FAO may be looking for a more practical profile than a theoretical one. And this is from Carla. How can professional people from developing and low-income countries who are not privileged to study abroad or take part in non-remunerated UN internships prepare themselves to have a better chance to be selected for UN positions?
Yeah, okay. Yes. Just maybe to start it off. I think PhD application and the practical versus theoretical depends to some extent which branch of the United Nations you're interested in. I think we have what we call the specialized agencies, which are technical agencies and set standards and norms in their field. You know, FAO sets standards on norms on agriculture and food issues. ICAO sets civil aviation standards, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're interested in that kind of technical work, probably in many cases, a PhD is, if not a requirement, certainly will give you a head start in terms of getting a job. Then you have the operational funds and programs who may be looking for people with more development management skills, project management skills, where your ability to work in a practical way rather than theoretical way will be very important. That doesn't mean you can't have a PhD, but you need to demonstrate you can work operationally and not just theoretically. So I think it does depend what type of work you want to do in the UN and which branch or agency of the UN you want to work in. People from developing countries, yes, there are frankly issues in terms of recruitment and the competition within the United Nations, all the United Nations is very tough. And they will often be looking at top international universities, you know, from any part of the world. On the other hand, if you look at the workforce of the big agencies, probably 90% or so are locally recruited staff. So that can be your career path. The big agencies all have offices in most developing countries, and you can apply there and with a good, successful career for a few years in the local office, you can apply for internationalization. You can also get internships at the local level, which again can get you noticed and may get you opportunities to apply for international positions. But I'm sure the colleagues here will have things to add. Thank you.
I think Nicholas has actually answered those questions very well. So I don't have very much to add, except with the second question, people from developing countries. There are JPO positions and I think associate expert positions, and they're funded by various countries for particular developing countries. So if funding is a problem, there are a number of sources and there are a number of mechanisms which are worth pursuing. And in some of the handouts, which are indicated by the QRs, there are more details for people in particular developing countries, they can access the application forms and all the rest to enter into various UN agencies. Thank you.
So we're taking some questions from here. Yeah, 1, 2.
Hi everyone, I'm Zohra Jalal doing my MA in Gender and Development. It's good to see UN colleagues here. I have worked with UN since 2018, especially Nicholas and Veronica, because I have the background with UNDP and UN Women. Just 3 points from, just to add on what panel just said, before maybe some of the friends also have the questions. First, the internship is not the only opportunity with the UN. There are many volunteering opportunities, UNV, and also online volunteering that you can do during your master's, just to find the connection and also the network with the different UN agencies. I can share with you the links. And also with the UN volunteer, it's just like a start point. It has a pay, like you will be a staff, but just only the name is UN volunteer. So no worries, the internship is not the only opportunity. And especially with the new structure with the UN agencies, they kind of removed this internship for most of, not removed, but they just try to replace it with the UN volunteer opportunities. So for the people to have a little pay or allowance as well. As Nicholas and other colleagues said, UN positions are competitive, but it's not something impossible. You just need to work on your application. You just like have to just showcase the work that you have done in the past or just your experience, but also to think smartly, because lots of people may have the similar experience like you, but not everyone will shape it in a way that the requirement of the UN is. The good thing with the UN is that you also get the knowledge and expertise in different areas. For example, different UN agencies have different mandate and requirement. If you work with UNDP, you will know like lots of the work with UN Women, UNFPA, and other agencies are similar, and you get a knowledge from that as well. So for the people who have maybe more like questions on this, or you want any link or any guidance and information, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Alex. I'm from Canada and I'm studying in the Power, Participation, Social Change. I just want to thank you for coming and talking to us. You may not be able to answer this question, but something that I've been struggling with while I've been here so far is where's the role for like lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people in international development and specifically in the UN? I'm not talking about programs for those people. I'm specifically talking about staff themselves. I haven't encountered anything about that since being here, and I struggle to think, do I have a place in international development as a like gender non-conforming queer woman? I wonder, will I be restricted by places I can go because of human rights status there? So that is a big question for me, and I hope that you might have some insight, but I understand if that's not people's personal experience. So thank you.
We have another question back there.
I would actually give you some thoughts because I was last week I was at IDEX in Geneva, and there was ADEX. I'm gonna give you the data later, but there was actually a whole section, the duty of care. And one of the questions that was brought up was about creating the international space and for staff. So I can give you the name of the people who are speaking in the organization, but it's a big question that is coming up right now. Or what does it mean being a queer person and working on the field, and the experience of them, and what does it mean in terms of like, can I express myself? Can I speak out? And it's a topic that what I saw, it's a topic that's being brought up a little bit right now, and there's still a lot of work to do, but it's picking up from what I can say. But I give you all the details later.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important question, I think, because working in the United Nations globally, I mean, you know, working across many different societies, cultures, legal frameworks, and I think that is an issue in certain countries. I think at the level of the United Nations, I think it is quite a supportive environment in principle. So if you're based at a headquarters duty station, or if you're based in a regional station, because I was several years in Bangkok, and there was a lot of both staff and programs there. But when you go down to the working at a specific country level, I think there are issues and difficulties involved.
Hi, my name is Joel. I'm from India. I'm doing MA Development Studies. So my question was, is there a specific set of skill set that we have to enhance on while doing masters if we want to pursue a career in UN? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Priya. I'm from Peru and I'm doing climate change and development. And my question is more related to the actual information that you put to apply. It's sometimes hard to really understand what they need. So if you have any hacks in order to actually at least get to the first point, because a lot of applications just are denied at the very beginning.
Yeah. I didn't quite get the first question, but on the second one about information on application, these 3 QRs represent 3 booklets, and you'll get some of the information you want from these. First of all, we're calling it a handbook on UN careers. Extracts from web pages of the UN careers website. So if you go on the UN careers website, there are going to be lots and lots of pages. I found that quite tricky when I was preparing for other career path seminars. So I went through and edited those pages and copied and pasted them into this document. And there are lots of different sections and different types of posts and grades and the financial aspects and all sorts of other things. And there's a table of contents. So you can get quite a lot of information from that. In terms of very practical tools, like it or not, we have to fill in a form. And there's an outfit called Inspira, which is a website. And the latest version was the 1st of August, 2024. So this is hot off the press. So this particular document, which I printed out, and I've sort of flipped through it on the website, but it's quite tricky to grasp. I'm glad I don't have to fill it in. But anyway, have a look at this, because this is the nuts and bolts of what you've got to fill in. And that will be helpful, because I think there's no alternative. There's another paper, which is the 3rd document. It's called A Guide to Careers in the UN System. This is once again a bit of a copy and paste thing from the website of the UNA UK in London. And they have a whole section on career opportunities. And for ease of reading, it's now it's in document form, so to speak, so you can read that as well as, well, this is just a synthesis of some of the things on their website. So I think that will give you quite a lot of information on joining the UN, and that'll keep you either busy, hopefully not frustrated. But anyway, happy reading.
I can give a couple of answers to both the questions. So in terms of skills, when I did my master, I knew that, for example, I didn't like project management. So that I took it off the table and I really like research. So I started to look into more skills and courses that they were focusing more on that, and they became helpful for an internship because I was getting on more on that pathway. And so it really kind of depends on what you like. I think that's the most important things to understand. It's what you like and what you would like to do. In terms of application, so for example, for the UN Women, you have to fill out the P11. But it depends on the agencies. The others, they have to require you to put it down on the profile on their website. So it really depends. But I was looking, for example, on my applications, and because for example, for the internship, you have a really, really brief number of characters, and you are like, what I'm going to write on this. So it was really what I wrote, and I went really specific on who I am, what I like, my skills, and my competence, and my competencies. So I went really specific, and I try as much as possible to show up what I really, really liked, of course, aligned to what kind of works they were doing. But it's a matter sometimes of really standing out. And I know it's really complicated. Like when we arrived in Barbados, we asked how many people were applying, and they were saying thousands. And then I think 20 of us were selected for the interviews, and then 5 of us got selected. So it's a high competition, we're aware of that. And I also did thousands of, probably not thousands, but many, many applications before being able to get one. And what actually Priya was saying, sometimes there's also a matter of good luck, good timing. It is true. Finding the right people, finding the new good opportunities, but yes, but also it's like, I feel like, probably I'm saying from a really psychological perspective, it's really knowing what you want and what you like, and that put it up front, I feel.
Just to add slightly, a lot of the recruitment processes are online, or almost all of them are, I suppose. And most of them are kind of automated now. So the first round is not done by the human resource department, it's done by a computer algorithm. So for example, you have to really make sure you fill it in according to what the job description says. So if it says you need 3 years work experience and you've had 2, then it won't be the HR department rejecting it, it'll be the computer. So you really have to make sure you like 2 working languages. You might forget to put 2 working languages in, and again, then you'll be automatically rejected. So there, I mean, I think it's very important to make sure you do have those minimum requirements met. And then in addition, I think soft skills can be very important depending on what kind of job you're applying to. So evidence in terms of leadership skills development courses you might have done, or project management courses you might have done, depending what kind of job you're applying for. So those can be important, as well as your academic qualification and the work experience and the working languages. All 3 of those are the minimum requirements. And just to add to the good work Mike's done in terms of assembling this, I've also seen DevEx has some very good career guides, how to get into the United Nations. Thank you.
Gotta say, those who find a solution to the epidemic of forms, they are going to change the world. Okay, we're going to take one question from the online people, 2 questions. And after that, I will really hope to hear some questions from the men of the room. You're really shy tonight. Come on.
Okay. Is it easy for a senior government employee, 50+ years old, who meets the requirements of an announced UN vacancy, to land a job at the UN system? And does it become harder with age? And does the UN recruitment policies deprioritize, perhaps informally, applicants coming from the public sector? And one more. Is there a pathway for civil servants from UN member states to work on deputation within the UN? If so, could you outline what such a process might involve in terms of eligibility, selection, and the types of roles typically available for government officials on deputation?
Actually, quite a lot of people join from national civil servants, civil services, sorry. So it is quite a common route of recruitment. And the age is not an issue depending on the seniority of the post you're applying for. So there are quite a number of former national civil servants who join at a relatively senior level as a resident coordinator or as an assistant secretary general or as a director of a department. And those people generally will be, you know, from 45 to 55 or older as well. So it really depends what the individual circumstances are and the seniority in the national government before you move over to the United Nations. The thing about joining the United Nations is that you have to be independent. You have to pledge to the United Nations Charter, and you can't show favor to an individual country. This can be a bit tricky sometimes when there is this secondment. I mean, it does happen, but those are for specific limited times. And if you want a career in the United Nations, you do have to bear in mind that you can't also be working for your own national civil service.
You want to add? You're okay. Well, we have time for last set of questions. Here we have one. Somebody else? Two.
Thank you so much for making the time to be with us tonight. My question is more of, let's say you have expertise in one area, but you want to pivot to another area, and you have training in that area, but not necessarily like hardcore experience. What are some of the things that you can do to get a job in that area in the UN? Or would you recommend, working in the field that you're experienced in and then try to make connections there into like what you actually want to do? Thank you.
Hello, my question is about, now we are taking the master degree, but what is the next step, or what is the common career in engineering? Because sometimes I search, there are many internships, there are many fellowships, but I'm not sure if this is correct to apply for this kind of internship, or maybe if someone have a work experience, we can try to apply to another job opportunities. What's the best, what is the correct way?
So in regards to the first question, I kind of feel what I see what you mean. For me, kind of like the element was kind of like, oh, it's hard. Starting from like having to go back to the basis was something I had to kind of compromise with. Like I feel like also the second question, I was like had been 30 years old, and I was like, I come with a lot of experience with a different sector skills and different kind of expertise, and then having to apply in a completely different world. I understood that I needed to go to an internship on a little bit more of a junior position. But once I arrived in the office and I spoke with my supervisor, I was like, yes, this is an interesting position, but I have all this knowledge. And I was lucky to have a really receptive supervisor that took advantage of, in a good way, of course, took advantage of the knowledge and the skill set that I already had, and actually made it worth it and putting in my favor while working at the UN. So it's kind of like when we talk about skills that you can move around between different sectors, and I'm sure that it's the same things for you, is just finding a new way to reinterpret them in a different field. It takes a little bit to figure it out, but there is always a way. And about yours, I understand like that it becomes to understanding what kind of things do you want to do. And if I take back to my experience, when I finished my master, I on one side founded my association, then on the other side, I was debating about what pathway would be. And the opportunity at the UN was a way to see on both sides, like what does it entail to working in a UN in a different kind of structure, but also working on the field. And then you see based on how those two works, for example, for my case, you see how those two works and what you actually works better for you, then you go on the best way that you think it's more appropriate for you. So start from the basics. Sometimes it could be frustrating a little bit if you have already some years of experience, but that helps you to make a little bit better the pathway towards what is better works for you. But I mean, like if you want to talk later or something, I'm happy to go a little bit into deeper.
Yes, I think it's quite an individual choice. I mean, there are many, many different ways of getting into the United Nations. And I don't think one size fits all. One can look at people who've joined recently or longer ago, and everyone has their own story to tell of how they came in. I mean, the kind of work experience, you know, whether you get it from the private sector or from the non-profit, are equally valid. You can do internships, you can do UNV work. But certainly if you already have, so, you know, a couple of years of solid work experience, which is relevant to the job, and the job is in the area you want to work, then you're probably ready to apply for it. I think pivoting is probably easier once you're in, rather than, I mean, you should go with your core strength to get in. And once you're in, you can look around for opportunities in areas that you might have a stronger interest in. Because I think there is a lot of opportunity to move around once you got a position in the UN. And many people move between different specializations or different agencies. So I think there are those opportunities to move around. But if you don't play up to your core strengths and experience and academic background at the beginning, it might just make it tougher to get in.
Yeah, I just have to add, there is this organization called the UN Volunteers. I actually started as a UNA volunteer. And then later on, the UN Volunteers were established. But this is an extremely good program with about 90 or 95% of people coming from developing countries at very different levels of competence, and some actually quite senior officials. So to answer the question of people working in the public service, maybe even senior civil servants, in my experience, I've met quite a few of these people who then become UNVs, sometimes up to 6 years, and they appreciate that experience, and they are the equivalent of experts. So in terms of functions, they're doing an international job using their national experience. In terms of payment and salary, it's not quite as much as the normal expert level. Having said that, people survive perfectly okay with their families and they gain that experience. So this is an area where you can get in. So in addition to the internship program, the JPO program, have a look at UN volunteers, because there are a lot of opportunities out there, and I think it's worth looking at.
So I'm just here to say a big thank you. I think really a big thank you, because you've unpacked a little bit of both what it means to be working in the UN and also some of the complexities there. How do you move around? What sorts of opportunities are there? What sorts of skills and expertise you need to have to get in? What are some of the practical nitty-gritties of form filling and some tips as in the QR codes? So I should thank all of our panelists and also Janba for nice moderation. I should say that, you know, this is something that they do voluntarily and generously have given of their time. And I'm hoping that those of you who get inspired by this panel and go on to have careers in the UN will come back and offer similar generous opportunities for the next generation of students. So a big round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you. Yes, Gary can take a picture.
Shall we take a picture? We're all here, please. Would you mind all stand up, please? Let's make a nice group picture.
I can. Thank you.
Everyone, smile. Thank you.